Hello everyone. Those of you who are new, I am Jay, and I'd like to give a huge welcome to the channel. For those of you who are not new, welcome back. I hope everyone is enjoying the content I have been making thus far. I have been working extremely hard coming up with a schedule for myself to get these videos out as quickly and as consistent as possible. I honestly haven't completely gotten it figured out yet, but it's a work in progress. So thank you all for sticking with me and being patient. This isn't an easy job to do. It takes a lot of time, and it's especially difficult when you have another full-time job like I do. And then, of course, other life responsibilities happen as well. So thank you all for the constant support. Please continue to like, share, subscribe if you are new, or if you aren't new and haven't subscribed yet, I'd really appreciate it if you all could subscribe as well. But enough chit chat, let's get started on today's case. This one is a very well-known solved true crime case. It's extremely gruesome, completely disturbing. Every moment of researching this case disgusted me in every possible way. I will have my disclaimer up now as a warning. I have done pretty disturbing cases before, but this one, in my opinion, is the most disturbing one I have done to date. Once I actually get into this case, I know a lot of you will find it familiar. The killer's name is very well known, but the victim of this case, I've noticed, he really isn't well known. So I wanted to do this case to share his name so he can be remembered and not the sick individual that took his life away. So let's get into this case. This is the disturbing and gruesome murder of John Price. John Charles Thomas Price, who often went by the nickname Pricey to his family and loved ones, was born on April 4th, 1955 in Gunda, New South Wales, Australia. He was the oldest of 6 children, which is a pretty big-sized family. I'm sure the house was chaotic with these 6 children growing up. I couldn't find much on his early life while researching, but online I did read that John didn't end up getting a full education, as he did drop out of school when he was about 14 years old. Despite his limited education, John Price was an extremely hard-working man. He found various physically demanding jobs as a young adult. He worked in heavy machinery and equipment. He had experience with trucking, and for the majority of his life, he worked as a miner. He married his one and only wife, Colleen, in 1973. During their 15 years of marriage, they had 3 children together, a son and 2 daughters. John and Colleen did end up getting a divorce in 1988, and I am not sure of the reason for their separation, but it seems like they ended things on pretty good terms and had a very great co-parenting relationship together. Colleen described her ex-husband as not a violent man and a great provider. He was perceived as friendly, good-natured, outgoing, and well-liked by pretty much everyone who met him. From everything I have read from my research for this case, one thing was very clear to me. John Price adored his children. After his divorce, the youngest daughter, who I believe was just 2 years old at the time, stayed with Colleen full-time, and the 2 older children lived with John. It was just a few years later, after the divorce, that John unfortunately met his killer. Her name is Catherine Knight, who will now be KK for the rest of the video. I will go ahead and give a little background on KK, as I believe it's important to get an idea of how and why a person like her is capable of committing such a heinous act to another person, and knowing KK's background may give some insight. KK was born on October 24th, 1955 in Tenterfield, New South Wales, Australia. She grew up in the rural small town of Aberdeen, which this case takes place in, but she had been born into a pretty dysfunctional family. Her mother, Barbara, had still been married to another man when she started an affair with KK's father, Ken Knight. And with this being a small town, the affair had become a very hot topic of discussion. And this was a different time during the 1950s, and the family received quite a bit of backlash from the ongoing affair. KK was one of 8 children living in all of this dysfunction. There were 4 children from within the marriage that Barbara had had prior to the affair. After she left her current husband to be with KK's father, 4 children, including KK, then came from this relationship. Allegedly, according to KK, she had been sexually abused by several different family members until the age of 11. It is also described that her father was a violent alcoholic who would rape and abuse her mother multiple times a day, and allegedly he would even do this in front of the children. Her mother would constantly complain about having sex, and she would complain about men in general. It is believed that because her mother kept complaining all the time, this is what started KK's own hatred and distrust of all men. During school, KK was described as a bully. She would bully the younger kids and fly into fits of rage. She even attacked a couple of kids during these fits. She did end up dropping out of high school by the age of 15. After dropping out of school, despite not being able to read or write very well, she quickly got a job as a cutter in a clothing factory. But not long after this, she quit this job for another job, which she would frequently call her dream job. She became an abattoir worker, which, if you don't know what an abattoir is, it's just a fancy name for a slaughterhouse butcher. KK was extremely good at her job. She was fascinated by the work at the slaughterhouse, and it's even said that she enjoyed watching the cows or pigs be killed. She eventually received her own set of knives after being promoted in this job, and she would call these knives her prized possessions. She always kept these knives within her reach. She would go to bed with these knives sitting on her nightstand. It was in 1973 that KK met her first husband, and pay close attention to the string of relationships KK had, as there is a clear pattern of abuse within these relationships with these men. Her first husband's name was David Kellett. During this decade-long relationship, it's very clear that David spent the majority of the time intoxicated. He was a frequent drinker, and it's my opinion that this made David a more easy target for her. Right before they married in 1974, KK's own mother warned him about her daughter. According to David, she said, quote, "You better watch out for this one or she'll fucking kill you," end quote. And he also went on to say that KK's mother told him that she had a screw loose somewhere. Despite this warning, they did marry in 1974. And it is reported by David Kellett himself that the night they got married, KK became upset because they only had sex 3 times and he fell asleep, and apparently this offended her, and she became so upset that he had fallen asleep that she began to strangle David while he was sleeping. He of course woke up and he was able to fight her off of him, and despite this incident that happened on their wedding night, they remained married for several more years. KK gave birth to 2 daughters with David, and violence continued throughout the entire relationship. At one point, she burned all of his clothes in a rage, and she also hit him over the head with a frying pan so hard that she fractured his skull. She apparently did this because David had come home late one night. David was honestly not faithful to KK, and when she discovered one of his affairs, she had attempted to leave her daughter, who was just a baby at the time, on some train tracks, and she left her there to be run over by a train. Thankfully, a bystander found the baby and removed her from the tracks before the train came. In another incident, several witnesses saw her pushing her child violently in the stroller down a busy street. It was after the birth of her first child that she had been diagnosed with postnatal depression. She did spend a few months in a psychiatric hospital for this depression, and during one of her hospitalizations, she told a couple of nurses that she was going to kill a mechanic who had fixed David's car, because this allowed David to be able to leave her. And don't ask me why, but despite this threat that she had made to multiple people, she was released from the hospital. And it was not long after that she had been released this time that thankfully David Kellett finally left KK for good. Her next relationship was in 1986 with a man named David Saunders. In 1986, KK quickly moved him into her home with her 2 daughters. After he moved in, things quickly became violent and abusive again. After he moved in, she became jealous, accused him of cheating on her on several occasions. According to David Saunders, to show him what she was capable of. And this is just so sad and completely disturbing. But she took David's 2-month-old puppy and she cut this puppy's throat right in front of him. Then after she killed this puppy, she knocked him unconscious with a frying pan. Why David Saunders didn't leave after this incident, I don't know, nor do I understand, but they did stay together after this incident. KK gave birth to her third daughter, who she had with David Saunders, in June of 1988. This relationship finally came to an end after another violent argument. During this argument, KK hit David Saunders in the face with an iron, and then she stabbed him in the abdomen with a pair of scissors. David, of course, did survive this attack, and this was the final straw for him, and he immediately left KK. He just couldn't take the constant violence and abuse from her any longer. KK's next relationship was with John Chillingworth, which started in the year of 1990. The following year, she gave birth to her fourth child and her only son. Not a lot is known about this relationship. It lasted for about 3 years. John Chillingsworth seems to describe the relationship as unpredictable when she became enraged, as she usually did, but he also stated that he never once feared for his life during the 3 years that they were together. This relationship ended when John Chillingworth learned that KK was having an affair with John Price. KK and John Price met at a local bar in Aberdeen. John did spend the majority of his life in Aberdeen as well, and he was definitely aware of KK's violent reputation. Again, this was a small town, so everyone gossiped about everybody, and everybody knew about KK and her violent nature. Even with this knowledge about KK, they shortly began dating after they met. In 1995, KK moved in with John and his 2 children that lived with him. And in the beginning, it seemed like the relationship was going well. John's children seemed to like KK. They thought she was a nice woman. But quickly after moving in, the violent arguments started. John Price didn't seem to mind the occasional violent arguments at first, but things, of course, quickly escalated. In 1998, KK told John that she wanted him to marry her, but John didn't have an interest in marrying again after he divorced his first wife, Colleen, and he was honest with KK about this. He told her he did not want to be married again. And KK, unsurprisingly, did not take this very well. She was furious about his refusal to marry her. In retaliation to this, she videotaped proof of items that John Price had stolen from his work. He had taken out-of-date medical kits from his job and took them home. She sent this videotaped evidence directly to John Price's boss, and he was then fired from his job as a miner that he had been in for over 17 years. And really quickly, I'm going to stop here for a moment. I think KK doing this just shows you how controlling and how cruelly calculated of a person she is. Don't get me wrong, John taking these medical kits from his job wasn't necessarily the right thing to do, but let's be real. How many people take expired or unused items from their job? And obviously no one's going to admit it because no one wants to be fired like John was for doing this. But come on, we all know that people take things from their job. That's undeniable. Not everyone, of course, but a lot of people do. But her physically sending videotape proof to his boss to purposely get him fired is sick. KK clearly does a lot of sick shit. She tries to be manipulative. She tries to control every single one of her relationships with these men. And I just feel so sorry for all of them from having to deal with everything KK has done to them. So anyway, after John was fired from his job, he instantly kicked KK out of his home when he found out that she had been the one who snitched on him. And you would think that this would be the end of the relationship, but sadly, a few months later, John and KK rekindled the relationship. But the arguments between them became more frequent after they got back together, because this time, John refused to let KK move back into his home. And John Price, remember, was a very likable guy. He had many friends, and they feared for him with his relationship with KK. Quite a few of his friends stopped hanging out with John altogether because he would not end the relationship with KK. As months went on, KK would repeat her prior history, and she became deeply paranoid that John was cheating on her. It was around this time that KK would tell several people, her friends, and even her co-workers, how she wanted to kill John Price. She would tell several people over the next few weeks. And as far as I can tell, none of the people she told during this time reported this to anybody. Not the authorities, no one. And I really don't understand why. This was such a small town that everyone knew KK's reputation. They knew how violent she could be. I don't know if they just didn't believe she was capable of murder or they thought she was joking around, but I would be terrified if someone I knew was telling me that they wanted to kill anyone. It's outrageous to me how people ignore being told something like this. So please, if anyone confides to you that they want to kill a person, and they're not saying it in a joking manner, even if you don't believe this person could go through with doing this, you just never know what another person is capable of. So getting back to the case, on February 27th, 2000, another violent argument occurred between John Price and KK. And this time, the argument had escalated to a point that had never happened before in this relationship. KK stabbed John in the chest. John did survive the stab wound to the chest, and he then immediately threw KK out of his house once again. At this point, it seemed like John was completely over the relationship. He had been wanting to end things for good for a while, and now, after being stabbed in the chest by her, he was finally ready to end the relationship once and for all. But he also feared for the lives of his children and for himself. He was scared that KK would target his children after he would break up with her. This brings us to the day he was murdered, just 2 days later, on February 29th, 2000. For John Price, the morning of February 29th did start out a little bit differently than usual. He went to the police station that morning to actually file a restraining order against KK for him and for his children. He was told at the police station that a restraining order could take a few weeks to process, despite him informing them of KK's violent behavior and how he was scared for the lives of his children and himself. After trying to get this restraining order, John went to work as normal, and he confided to several of his coworkers that if he didn't show up to work the next day, it was because KK killed him. That's what he told all of his coworkers. So obviously John is completely terrified. He's trying to get a restraining order. He's telling several of his coworkers, letting them know that if something were to happen to him, KK would be the cause. It's almost as if he knew she was going to do something to him that day. And it's insane. His coworkers begged him not to see her again when he was confiding to them. After John got off of work, he briefly stopped home to discover KK was already there, and she had sent John's children to their friends for a sleepover. John, who clearly didn't want to be alone with her, went straight to the neighbor's house, and he stayed there until about 11 o'clock that night. He then headed back into his home, he took a shower, and he quickly fell asleep in his bed. Then a little later, after he had fallen asleep, KK, dressed in a black lingerie that she had bought earlier that same day, she then woke John up to have sex. Afterwards, John fell back asleep, and once he was fast asleep, KK took one of her beloved knives that she had always kept with her, and she went into a frenzy, stabbing John several times. John woke up during this attack. He managed to get out of the bedroom, down the hallway, and he did in fact make it to the front door, and he opened it. They know this because of the blood trail from within the crime scene. But we don't know if he finally collapsed from the multiple stab wounds or if KK got to him and pulled him back inside. But regardless, John Price didn't make it out of the house, and he died from bleeding out from the stab wounds. He was just 44 years old. But this horrific murder doesn't end there. I would like to give another warning here before I continue with the case. This next portion is absolutely sick and is completely disturbing. I will put in a timestamp in the description box if you would like to skip this part because it's truly horrifying. So after John died from his wounds, KK first went out into town and withdrew $1,000 from John's ATM card. She then came back to the house. She dragged his body back into the hallway, and she proceeds to skin John Price's body. She skinned his entire body without any hesitation, and with her experience working at the slaughterhouse for years, she did this with such precision and expertise that it is described that she was able to make an entire skin suit pelt out of her victim John, which included his head, face, ears, neck, torso, genital organs, and legs. And then she hung his body and this complete skin pelt on a meat hook. She then decapitated John and began cooking an entire meal with John Price's body parts. She placed his decapitated head in a pot on John's own stove and began cooking it with vegetables and gravy. She then began cutting up pieces of John's body. She cooked the meat along with baked potato, pumpkin, beetroot, zucchini, cabbage, yellow squash, and gravy. And then, if that's not sick enough, KK set the dinner table for two. She made 2 full plate servings of John's cooked body parts with the vegetables, and on top of these plates was a note card that had the names of John's children on it. KK was in fact planning to serve and feed John's body parts to his own children. And thank God the police came into the home before his children did. I don't even want to think about how traumatizing it would have been for his children if they had actually eaten from this plate. Later on, investigators did find a third plate that was thrown outside, and KK never confirmed this, but it is speculated that this third plate was her own plate and she had eaten some of it but didn't like it, and that's why this plate was then just thrown out the window. After KK was finished with making this meal from hell, she dragged John's headless body, propped him up with his legs crossed, and she left a note on his body that read, quote, "Time got you back, Jonathan, for raping my daughter. You to Beck, for Ross, for little John. Now play with little John's dick, John Price," end quote. Which, because of KK's lack of writing skills, to me this is very difficult to read and decipher, but this note is basically alleging that the reason why John had been killed by her was because he had allegedly raped KK's daughter, which this has no bearing at all. This is just her pathetic attempt to degrade John even further with a false allegation. KK then decided to ingest several pills in a suicide attempt, and she ended up just passing out near John's body. In the early hours of the morning, when John didn't arrive to work his shift, his coworkers immediately contacted the police because of what John had told them the day before. And as you can imagine, the police walked in on one of the most horrific scenes. Blood was everywhere throughout the home. It was on the front doorknob. It was in the kitchen, in the hallway, on the countertops. They found pieces of John's flesh in various locations all over the house. John's decapitated head was still in the pot on the stovetop when they arrived. I just couldn't imagine seeing this gruesome crime scene. I read that many of the policemen that investigated this crime scene in this house had to seek counseling for years afterwards, and I don't doubt it. I don't know how anyone can walk into a house in that state and not need therapy afterwards. They found KK unconscious and immediately took her to the hospital. She recovered pretty quickly, and she was interviewed for the first time on March 4th, 2000. And immediately she claimed that she didn't remember anything about the murder or what happened that night. She claimed that she was suffering from some sort of amnesia or a blackout, which I call complete bullshit on, and not everyone will agree with me on that, but I think she remembers exactly what happened and exactly what she did to John Price. Some will argue that it's possible that this was someone who snapped and murdered their significant other, and is it possible? Sure. But do I think that's what happened with this case? No, I really don't. She told multiple people how she wanted to kill John prior to his murder. She was the one who sent John's kids off to a sleepover that night. I believe that she premeditated this murder. The psychiatrist that interviewed KK didn't believe that she didn't remember the murder either. They declared her sane and fit to stand trial. John's body was laid to rest a few days later after his murder. The community of Aberdeen were appalled and grief-stricken over hearing about how John had been murdered and what had happened to his body after he had been killed. Initially, KK actually offered to plead guilty for manslaughter, which of course was rejected. KK was arraigned on March 2nd, 2001 on the charge of murdering John Price. She originally pleaded not guilty. Her trial set date was on October 15th, 2001. Due to the overwhelming evidence, KK realized that there was just no way that she was not going to get a guilty verdict, so she then changed her mind and she decided to then plead guilty. The judge ordered her to have another evaluation to make sure that she understood what a guilty plea meant for her, and again, the psychiatrist determined that KK was sane, but this time did give her a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. Despite her now guilty plea, KK never took responsibility for murdering John Price. I'm glad that KK changed her plea to guilty at the very least, because John's family and loved ones thankfully didn't have to go through an entire trial and hear every graphic detail of what was done to John. So if there is one positive thing to this case, it's that. Then finally, on November 8th, 2001, KK was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was even ordered that on her papers be marked with never to be released. This marked the first woman in Australian history to receive this verdict. KK will never set foot outside of the prison she resides in. And for that, we all should be grateful that this monster of a woman will rot in prison for the rest of her life. John Price's murder is truly one of the most gruesome cases in history. The fear he had lived with throughout the last couple of years of his life when he was with KK must have been absolute hell. All of his children are adults now, and it's awful that they have to live with knowing what happened to their father. John Price was loved by everyone that knew him. He is the one who deserves to be remembered. As for his killer, the only thing that she deserves is to rot in the deepest pits of hell. But that is all I have for today's case. If you enjoyed, please give this video a like. Comment down below. I always love seeing everyone's thoughts about true crime cases. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. That is all from me today. See you all in case number 12. Bye, everyone.